The first thing Commander Velthar noticed when the Crimson Talon dropped out of hyperspace wasn't the planet, it was the silence. Deathworld 12 hung in the void like a bruised eye. Its surface swirled with perpetual storm systems that could strip the flesh from a Korthani warrior in seconds. The planet's designation had been earned through blood, 43 separate colonization attempts, each ending in complete annihilation, not from the weather, though that was lethal enough, not from the wildlife, though the apex predators could hunt a battalion to extinction. The real killer was the planet itself, seismic activity that could split continents, volcanic eruptions that could blot out the sun for decades, and gravity fluctuations that turned bones to powder. But humans had tried anyway. Of course they had, sir. Navigation Officer Krexaya's voice crackled through the bridge comm. We're detecting no orbital defense platforms, no satellite networks, no radio chatter. Velthar asked for eyes focused on a tactical display. 3 months ago, the human colony of New Gethsemane had been broadcasting regularly. Population 847,000. Agricultural output exceeding projections. Morale high despite the hellish conditions. Then the transmissions had stopped. The Galactic Concordat had dispatched the Crimson Talon to investigate. Standard protocol for missing colonies. Assume total loss. Conduct preliminary sweep. Document for the archives. Clean. Simple. Routine. Deploy. Scanner drones. Velthar ordered. Full spectrum analysis. I want to know what happened to these crazy bastards. The bridge crew worked in practiced silence. Velthar had commanded this ship for 12 cycles, fought in the hegemony wars, witnessed the glassing of 3 star systems. He'd seen horrors that would drive lesser species to madness. But something about this mission felt different. Wrong. The first wave of data streamed in. Atmospheric readings showed massive electromagnetic storms. Seismic sensors detected ongoing tectonic upheaval. Radiation levels were off the charts, not from the planet's natural emissions, but from something else, something artificial. Commander, Science Officer Yithalin's voice was tight with confusion. The radiation signatures. They're not from the planet. They're from weapons discharge. Massive weapons discharge. Velthar's blood ran cold. Show me. The holographic display materialized above the bridge, showing a 3-dimensional map of the planet's surface. Red markers indicated radiation hotspots, hundreds of them, scattered across 3 continents. Each marker represented weapons fire powerful enough to level cities. How many? Velthar asked. Conservative estimate? 12,000 individual weapon discharges. Energy output suggests military grade. Plasma artillery, fusion warheads, antimatter charges. Yithalin's voice dropped to a whisper. Sir, this wasn't just a battle. This was a war. But against what? The humans had been alone on Deathworld 12. The nearest inhabited system was 40 light-years away. No hostile species had been detected in this sector for decades. Life sign readings, Velthar demanded. The scanner operator's manipulator appendages danced across the console. Scanning. Scanning. I'm getting. Wait. The operator's eye stalks retracted in surprise. Commander, I'm detecting 1 human. Life sign. Female. Approximately 25 standard years old. She's in the capital city ruins. 1 survivor. Out of 847,000. Prep the shuttle. Velthar ordered. Full combat loadout. If someone or something wiped out an entire human colony, we need to know what we're dealing with. As the crew prepared for planetfall, Velthar studied the tactical display. The weapon discharge patterns were chaotic, desperate, not the organized strikes of an invading force, but the frantic firing of defenders under siege. But defending against what? The shuttle bay doors open, revealing Deathworld 12 in all its savage glory. The planet's surface writhed beneath perpetual storm clouds, lightning crackling between the layers of atmosphere. It was beautiful in the way the apex predators were beautiful, magnificent, and utterly lethal. Sir, Communications Officer Thexany called out. I'm picking up a transmission from the surface. It's the human survivor. She's broadcasting on all frequencies. Put it through. Static filled the bridge. Then a voice emerged, calm, measured, utterly human. This is Corporal Mira Kavanaugh, New Gethsemane Defense Corps. If you're receiving this transmission, stay away from the surface. The Vex High Armada is still active. Repeat, do not attempt planetary approach. The Vex High are still hunting. Velthar's blood turned to ice. The Vex High, the nightmare species from the galactic core. bioengineered killers that had ravaged 12 systems before disappearing into the void. They were supposed to be extinct. How many? He whispered. The answer came from his tactical officer. Preliminary. Scans suggest VEX have biomass equivalent to 300,000 individual organisms, sir. If they're still active, how is one human still alive? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. One human, alone on a planet crawling, with the galaxy's most efficient killers, still alive after 3 months, still broadcasting warnings. Velthar made his decision. Take us down. The shuttle razor wind descended through Deathworld 12's atmosphere like a stone through acid. Velthar gripped his command chair as the craft bucked and shuddered through. The electromagnetic storms outside the viewports, lightning split the sky in fractal patterns, each bolt carrying enough energy to power a small city. Approaching the capital city, Pilot Nexcar announced, or what's left of it. Velthar's eyes widened as New Gethsemane came into view. The city hadn't just been destroyed, it had been transformed into something from a nightmare. Skyscrapers were twisted into impossible spirals, their surfaces coated with a black, organic substance that pulsed with its own rhythm. Streets had been carved into geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, and everywhere, moving through the ruins like shadows given form, were the HFY. They were worse than the archive footage had suggested. Each creature stood nearly 3 meters tall, with chitinous exoskeletons that shifted color to match their surroundings. Their limbs were wrong, too many joints, too many angles, ending in appendages that could serve as weapons, tools, or sensory organs depending on need. But it was their faces that truly terrified. Flat, featureless surfaces that somehow conveyed malevolent intelligence. Landing zone secured. Nexcar reported. The human signal is coming from the government district, approximately 2 kilometers northwest. Velthar checked his weapon one final time. The plasma rifle felt inadequate against what they'd seen, but it was better than nothing. Remember, we're here for information and extraction. If we encounter hostiles, fall back to the shuttle immediately. The boarding ramp descended with a mechanical whine. The first breath of Deathworld 12's atmosphere was like inhaling molten metal. Velthar's environmental suit sealed automatically, but he could still feel the planet's hostility pressing against him like a physical weight. They moved through the ruins in standard formation, Velthar leading, flanked by Sergeant Crystal and Corporal Yexeny. The government district had once been the heart of New Gethsemane, filled with administrative buildings and public spaces. Now it was a maze of rubble and organic growths that seemed to watch their every movement. Contact, Yexeny whispered. 300 meters, moving parallel to our position. Velthar raised his rifle, scanning the twisted landscape. There a flicker of movement between the collapsed buildings. The HFY moved with liquid grace, their forms shifting and adapting to the terrain. They were being hunted, but the hunters were taking their time. Human signal is stronger, Crystal reported. Just ahead, they rounded a corner and stopped. In the center of what had once been a public square stood a human female, perfectly still, perfectly calm. She wore the tattered remains of a military uniform, and her pale skin was marked with scars that spoke of countless battles. In her hands, she held a weapon that Velthar didn't recognize, some sort of energy rifle, with organic components grafted onto its surface. Corporal Kavanaugh, Velthar called out, "We're here to extract you." She turned slowly, and Velthar saw her eyes. They were the eyes of someone who had seen hell and decided to make it her home. "You shouldn't have come," she said. "They've been waiting for you." The attack came from everywhere at once. HFY erupted from the rubble like deadly flowers, their weapons already charging. Velthar's training kicked in, and he dropped to one knee, firing controlled bursts at the nearest target. His plasma bolt struck the creature's center mass, and it staggered but didn't fall. The HFY's exoskeleton absorbed the energy, redistributing it through its body in a brilliant display of bioluminescent patterns. "Fall back," Velthar shouted, but it was too late. More HFY appeared behind them, cutting off their retreat. They were surrounded. Crystal's rifle spoke in rapid bursts, each shot finding its mark, but the HFY kept coming, their bodies adapting to the weapon's fire. Where plasma bolts struck, their exoskeletons grew thicker. Where kinetic rounds hit, their forms became more fluid. The Mira Kavanaugh opened fire. Her weapon didn't sound like anything Velthar had heard before. It produced a low, harmonic whine that seemed to resonate in his bones. The energy beams that emerged weren't the clean, focused bolts of military-grade plasma rifles. They were chaotic, writhing things that seemed to twist reality as they passed through it. The first beam struck a HFY center mass and the creature simply unraveled. Its exoskeleton cracked along previously invisible fault lines and its body collapsed in on itself like a deflated balloon. The second beam caught another HFY as it leaped from building to building, and the creature's adaptive camouflage went haywire, cycling through every color in the spectrum before its nervous system finally overloaded. "What the hell is that weapon?" Yexini shouted over the sounds of battle. Mira's response was calm, almost conversational. HFY biology is based on quantum entanglement networks. Disrupt the quantum field, and their cellular structure becomes unstable. She fired again, and another HFY collapsed into a pile of twitching flesh. "I've had 3 months to study." The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Velthar's team worked in practice coordination, their weapons creating overlapping fields of fire. But it was Mira who turned the tide. She moved through the chaos like death itself, her modified weapon cutting down HFY with surgical precision. She knew exactly where to aim, exactly when to fire. When the last HFY fell, silence descended over the square like a shroud. Velthar checked his team minor injuries, but they were all alive. Then he looked at Mira, who was calmly reloading her weapon. "How?" he asked. She looked up at him with those terrible, knowing eyes. "They're not just hunting me, Commander. They're afraid of me, and they should be." In the distance, more HFY calls echoed through the ruins, hunting calls. The real battle was just beginning. The abandoned subway tunnels beneath New Gethsemane stretched for kilometers, a labyrinth of concrete and steel that had somehow survived the HFY assault. Mira led them through the darkness with the confidence of someone who had mapped every inch of the underground network. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the sound of their footsteps echoed ominously in the confined space. "How long have you been down here?" Velthar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 months. "To weeks, for days," Mira replied without hesitation. "Since the initial breach." They reached a junction where multiple tunnels converged. Mira held up her hand, signaling for silence. In the distance, they could hear the distinctive clicking sounds of HFY communication, a rapid-fire series of chittering noises that seemed to convey complex tactical information. "They're coordinating," Crystal observed. "Pack hunters." Mira nodded grimly. "They've been learning, adapting. Each wave gets smarter, more organized." She gestured to the tunnel walls, which were covered in scratches and burn marks. "I've been mapping their behavioral patterns. They're not just killing for food or territory. They're trying to understand us." Velthar studied the marks on the walls. Some looked like weapon impacts, but others were different, organic, almost artistic in their complexity. "What do you mean?" "The HFY aren't just bioengineered killers," Mira explained. "They're a collective intelligence. Each individual shares memories and experiences with the hive. When they encounter something new, they study it, analyze it, incorporate it into their collective knowledge." She paused, her expression growing darker. "The problem is, humans don't fit their understanding of prey species." The clicking sounds grew louder, more urgent. Mira's hand moved to her weapon. "They're coming. Multiple approach vectors. We need to move." They ran through the tunnels, Mira's modified rifle casting strange shadows on the walls. Behind them, the HFY calls grew louder, more numerous. Velthar's team had fought in dozens of battles, but this was different. They weren't just being hunted, they were being herded. "Here," Mira said, turning into a side tunnel. "Emergency bunker. The city planners built it to withstand seismic activity, but it's held up against everything the HFY can throw at it." The bunker was larger than Velthar had expected, filled with salvaged equipment and supplies. Weapons of every description hung from the walls, some human, some clearly alien in origin. At the center of the room stood a massive holographic display, showing the city in 3 dimensions, with thousands of red dots moving through the ruins. "You've been tracking them," Yexini said. "Studying the display for 3 months, Mira confirmed. "I've identified 4 to 7 distinct behavioral patterns, 12 different subspecies, and at least 3 separate command hierarchies." She manipulated the hologram, zooming in on specific areas. The initial invasion force was approximately 300,000 individuals. Current estimates suggest they've grown to over 400,000. Velthar felt his blood run cold. "They're reproducing. Worse, they're recruiting." Mira pulled up another section of the display, showing the city's outskirts. They've been collecting DNA from the human population, incorporating it into their own genetic matrix. Each generation is more human than the last. The implications were staggering. If the HFY could assimilate human traits, human knowledge, human tactics, we need to get you off this planet, Velthar said. The Conqueror needs to know what's happening here. Mira's laugh was bitter. I've tried to leave, Commander, 7 times, each time. They've been waiting for me. They know every escape route, every potential hiding place. They've turned this entire planet into a trap, as if summoned by her words. The bunker's warning systems activated. Lights flashed, and a synthesized voice announced, "Perimeter breach detected." Multiple hostiles approaching from all vectors. Velthar's team took defensive positions, but Mira remained calm. She moved to a control panel and activated a series of defensive measures. Force fields materialized across the bunker's entrances, and automated turrets descended from the ceiling. "You've been planning for this," Crystal observed. "I've been planning for everything," Mira replied. "The HFY are predictable once you understand their patterns. They'll probe our defenses, test our weapons, analyze our tactics. Then they'll withdraw and adapt." The first wave of HFY struck the bunker like a living tsunami. They poured through the tunnels in perfect coordination, their forms shifting and adapting to bypass the defensive measures. Some elongated their bodies to slip through narrow spaces. Others grew additional limbs to climb along the walls and ceiling. A few even began to emit electromagnetic pulses that interfered with the bunker systems. Velthar opened fire, his plasma rifle cutting down the first HFY to breach the outer defenses. But for every one he killed, 2 more took its place. The creatures moved within human grace, their adaptive camouflage making them nearly invisible against the bunker's metallic surfaces. "They're learning our weapons patterns," Yexini shouted, adjusting their tactics in real time. Mira's response was to activate her modified rifle and begin firing. Each shot found its mark, but the HFY were already adapting. The first few targets collapsed immediately, but subsequent ones began to show resistance to her quantum disruptor technology. "They're sharing the experience," Mira said, her voice tight with concentration. "Every death teaches them something new." The battle intensified. Velthar's team fought with desperate efficiency, but they were outnumbered 50 to 1. The bunker's defensive systems were failing one by one, overloaded by the sheer number of attackers. Smoke filled the air, and the smell of burning flesh, both alien and human, made it difficult to breathe. Then something changed. The HFY attacks became more coordinated, more specifically targeted. They weren't just trying to overwhelm the defenders, they were trying to capture them alive. "They want prisoners," Velthar realized. "They want to study us." Mira's expression grew grim. "That's what they did to the colony. They didn't just kill everyone, they harvested them. Bodies for genetic material, minds for tactical information, entire family units for behavioral analysis." She paused to fire at a HFY that had gotten too close. "I'm the last one because I'm the only one they haven't figured out yet." The defensive perimeter collapsed, and HFY began pouring into the bunker's main chamber. Velthar's team formed a tight circle, their weapons creating a deadly crossfire. But it wasn't enough. They were going to be overrun. "There's another way," Mira said, her voice calm despite the chaos. "But you're not going to like it." She moved to the central console and began entering commands. The holographic display changed, showing the city's power grid and the massive fusion reactors that had powered New Gethsemane. "The reactors are still online," she explained. "I've been keeping them running for 3 months, using the power to maintain the city's defensive systems. But if I overload them, you'll irradiate half the continent," Velthar finished. "And kill every HFY within 1,000 kilometers," Mira replied. "It's the only way to stop them from spreading." The bunkers shook as more HFY broke through the outer defenses. They were running out of time. "Do it," Velthar ordered. Mira's fingers moved across the console with practiced precision, but as she worked, her expression grew troubled. "Commander, there's something else. The HFY aren't just here by accident. They were sent. Someone or something is directing them." Before Velthar could respond, the bunker's main entrance exploded inward, and the largest HFY he had ever seen emerged from the smoke and debris. This one was different, more human in its proportions, but still unmistakably alien. When it spoke, its voice was a horrifying blend of human and HFY elements. "The female will come with us," it said. "She has information we require." Mira looked up from the console, her finger hovering over the final command sequence. "Not today." she said, and pressed the button. The lights went out, and the world began to shake. The fusion reactors overloaded in sequence, their deaths announced. By a low, harmonic rumble that seemed to emanate from the planet's core itself, Mira's finger remained on the console as emergency power kicked in. Bathing the bunker in hellish red light, the massive HFY commander tilted its head, studying her with what might have been curiosity. Interesting, it said, its voice a disturbing blend of human inflection and alien harmonics. The female chooses mutual destruction over capture. This behavior was not predicted. Velthar kept his rifle trained on the creature, but he knew it was futile. The thing was huge, nearly 4 meters tall, with an exoskeleton that seemed to incorporate human bone and tissue into its structure. Worse, it was clearly intelligent in a way that the other HFY weren't. This wasn't just a hunter, it was a general. The reactors will reach critical cascade in 4 to 7 minutes, Mira said, her voice steady despite the approaching apocalypse. Enough time for the radiation to cook every living thing on this continent, including us, the HFY commanders. Featureless face somehow conveyed amusement. The female assumes we cannot shield ourselves from radiation. This assumption is incorrect. It gestured with one of its bladed appendages, and the other HFY in the bunker began to retreat. However, the loss of this breeding ground would be inconvenient. Breeding ground. The words hit Velthar like a physical blow. The HFY weren't just occupying Deathworld 12, they were using it. As a nursery, we offer an alternative. The commander continued. The female will submit to integration. Her unique resistance patterns will be incorporated into our collective. In exchange, we will evacuate this world before the radiation reaches lethal levels. Mira's laugh was sharp and bitter. Integration? You mean lobotomy, we mean evolution. The commander replied, the human species shows remarkable adaptability. Your capacity for violence, your willingness to sacrifice, your ability to find solutions in impossible circumstances. These traits will enhance our collective significantly over my dead body. Velthar snarled, but the commander ignored him. The female has 30 minutes to decide, it said. After that, we began harvesting the remaining specimens. The HFY withdrew, but Velthar could hear them moving through the tunnels, surrounding the bunker. They weren't leaving, they were regrouping. Can you stop the overload? Velthar asked. Mira shook her head. The cascade is already underway. But he's right, they can probably shield themselves from the initial radiation burst. We need a better plan. She moved to the weapons cache and began pulling out equipment that Velthar didn't recognize. Some of it was clearly human in origin, but it had been modified with alien technology. The results looked like torture devices designed by a mad scientist. What are those? Yixini asked. Weapons specifically designed to kill HFY, Mira replied. I've been working on them for 3 months. The quantum disruptor was just the beginning. She held up a device that looked like a crossbow mated with a particle accelerator. This one fires projectiles that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The HFY's adaptive armor can't defend against attacks that come from directions that don't technically exist. Crystal examined another weapon, a rifle that seemed to be made partially of living tissue. And this one? Biological warfare. It introduces a virus that specifically targets HFY neural pathways. The virus was engineered using genetic material from the colonists they harvested. Poetic justice. In a way, Velthar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bunker's temperature. You've been using the dead as weapons? The dead deserve vengeance, Mira replied simply, and the living deserve to survive. They armed themselves with Mira's horrific arsenal and prepared for the inevitable assault. The HFY commander had given them 30 minutes, but Velthar suspected they wouldn't wait that long. The creatures were too intelligent to leave their enemies time to prepare. He was right. The attack came 15 minutes early, launched from 6 different directions simultaneously. But this time, the HFY weren't just trying to capture, they were trying to exterminate. They poured into the bunker like a living flood, their forms shifting and adapting as they moved. Velthar opened fire with the dimensional crossbow and watched in fascination as the first projectile struck a HFY and seemed to tear it apart. From the inside, the creature's exoskeleton cracked along impossible angles, and its body folded in on itself like origami made of flesh and bone. Beside him, Crystal's biological rifle was proving equally effective. Each shot delivered a payload of engineered viruses that attacked the HFY's nervous system. The creatures would stumble, their movements becoming erratic before collapsing in convulsions. But the HFY were adapting. The second wave showed partial resistance to the dimensional attacks, their exoskeletons somehow shifting to exist in multiple dimensions. The third wave was completely immune to the biological weapons, their systems having developed antibodies in real time. They're learning faster than we can kill them, Yexani shouted over the sounds of battle. Mira's response was to activate a device that Velthar hadn't noticed before, a small, innocuous-looking box that sat in the corner of the bunker. The moment she pressed the activation stud, every HFY in the bunker stopped moving. Psionic dampener, she explained. It disrupts the quantum entanglement network that connects their minds. Without the collective, they're just individual animals. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The HFY began attacking each other, their predatory instincts overriding their tactical intelligence. What had been a coordinated assault became a chaotic free-for-all, but the dampener's range was limited and more HFY were coming. The bunker's defenses were failing, and the radiation from the overloading reactors was beginning to affect the air itself. Velthar could taste metal in his mouth, and his environmental suit was registering dangerous levels of contamination. The reactors will reach critical in 8 minutes, Mira announced. We need to reach the surface before the cascade hits. They fought their way through the tunnels, Mira's weapons cutting through the HFY ranks like a scythe through wheat. But for every creature they killed, 2 more took its place. The HFY were throwing everything they had at them, desperate to capture Mira before the radiation made the planet uninhabitable. They emerged from the tunnels into the ruins of New Gethsemane just as the first reactor achieved critical mass. The explosion lit up the horizon like a second sun, and the shockwave that followed leveled what remained of the city's outer districts. Radiation poured across the landscape in visible waves, and the HFY began to retreat toward their ships. But their commander wasn't giving up. It stood in the center of the ruins, surrounded by the largest and most heavily armored HFY Velthar had ever seen. Its voice carried across the devastated cityscape like a death knell. The female has impressed us, it said. Her weapons, her tactics, her willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. These traits will be preserved in our collective. She will be remembered as the mother of a new evolution. Mira raised her quantum disruptor and aimed it at the commanders. Center mass, I'll be remembered as the human who killed you all. The final battle began with a sound like reality tearing itself apart. The air itself seemed to scream as Mira's quantum disruptor fired. The beam struck the HFY commander center mass, and for a moment, Velthar thought it was over. The creature's exoskeleton cracked, its form wavering like a mirage in the desert. But then it stabilized, its body somehow adapting to the quantum disruption in real time. Impossible, Mira breathed, but she was already firing again. The commander's response was to emit a sound that wasn't quite a roar, wasn't quite a scream, but something far worse. It was a call to war that resonated through the quantum field itself, and every HFY within 10 kilometers answered. They poured from the ruins like a living tsunami, their forms shifting and changing as they moved. Some grew additional limbs for speed, others developed ranged weapon appendages. A few began to emit energy fields that interfered with the team's equipment. Velthar's plasma rifle spoke in rapid bursts, each shot carefully aimed at critical points on the HFY exoskeletons. But the creatures were adapting faster than he could kill them. The first wave fell to concentrated fire, but the second wave showed improved armor plating. The third wave was nearly immune to energy weapons altogether. They're sharing battlefield experience in real time, Crystal observed. Switching to kinetic rounds, every death teaches them something new. The dimensional crossbow proved more effective, but its ammunition was limited. Each shot tore through the HFY ranks like a scythe, but Velthar could feel the weapon's power cells draining. He had maybe 20 shots left before it became an expensive club. Yexania's biological rifle was creating chaos in the HFY ranks. The engineered viruses were spreading from creature to creature, causing entire sections of their formation to collapse in convulsions. But the HFY were quarantining the infected, cutting off their own limbs to prevent the spread of contamination. Adaptable bastards, Yexani muttered, firing another viral payload into the crowd. Mira had switched to a weapon that Velthar hadn't seen before, a rifle. That seemed to be made of crystallized light. Each shot created a brief tear in space-time, and anything caught in the tear simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not disintegrated, simply removed from reality. What is that thing? Velthar shouted over the sounds of battle. Something I found in the HFY wreckage, Mira replied, firing another reality-tearing shot. I think they stole it from someone else, someone who knew how to fight them. The battle raged across the ruins of New Gethsemane with desperate intensity. The HFY came in waves, each one more organized than the last. They used the rubble for cover, coordinated their attacks with military precision, and adapted their tactics to counter every weapon the defenders deployed. But the humans fought back with the fury of the doom. Velthar's team had been trained for this outnumbered, outgunned, fighting impossible odds. They moved like a single organism, covering each other's blind spots, sharing ammunition, coordinating their fire to maximum effect. The first major casualty came when a HFY warrior managed to get close enough to engage Crystal. In melee combat, the alien's bladed appendages moved within human speed, and Crystal's combat armor was no match for weapons that could slice through starship hull plating. He went down fighting, his rifle firing until the very last moment. Crix, Ixity screamed. But there was no time to mourn. The HFY were pressing their advantage, and the defensive line was crumbling. Mira's response was to activate another of her horrific devices, a sphere that emitted a pulse of energy that seemed to age everything it touched. HFY caught, and the pulse began to decay rapidly, their exoskeletons crumbling to dust, their bodies withering away. But the effect was limited, and the sphere burned out after a single use. Temporal weapon, she explained, accelerates time locally. I've only got one more. The HFY commander had been observing the battle from a distance, but now it entered the fray directly. The creature moved with impossible grace, its form shifting and adapting to counter every attack. When Velthar fired the dimensional crossbow at it, the commander's body partially phased out of reality, allowing the projectile to pass harmlessly through. When Ixity tried to infect it with the biological weapon, the commander's immune system adapted in seconds, neutralizing the virus. Before it could take hold, it's learning faster than we can hurt it, Velthar realized. The commander's voice carried across the battlefield, somehow audible despite the chaos. Your resistance is admirable, but futile. We have studied your species for 3 months. We know your strengths, your weaknesses, your tactical preferences. You cannot surprise us. Mira's laugh was wild, almost hysterical. You think you know us. You don't know the first thing about humans. She activated the second temporal sphere, but instead of targeting the HFY, she aimed it at the overloading reactor complex. The pulse struck the fusion containment systems, and time began to accelerate around the critical mass. What should have been a controlled cascade became an instantaneous explosion. The second reactor detonated with the force of a small star, and the radiation pulse that followed turned the sky itself into a weapon. HFY caught in the open began to cook from the inside, their adaptive armor useless against the fundamental forces of atomic decay. But the commander and its elite guard were shielded. Their exoskeletons somehow adapted to absorb and redistribute the radiation. They kept coming, relentless as death itself. Ixity went down next, overwhelmed by a pack of smaller HFY that attacked from multiple angles. Her screams were cut short as razor-sharp claws found the weak points in her armor. She died with her finger on the trigger, her biological rifle firing its last payload into the creatures that killed her. To left, Velthar said grimly, checking his ammunition. The dimensional crossbow was down to its last 3 shots, and his plasma rifle was running on fumes. 2 is enough, Mira replied. She had activated another device, this one a backpack-sized unit that hummed with barely contained energy. Commander, you said you wanted to understand humans. Let me show you what we're really capable of. The device on her back began to emit a low, harmonic tone that seemed to resonate with the quantum field itself. The HFY froze, their movements becoming erratic. Even the commander seemed affected, its perfect coordination faltering. Quantum resonance amplifier, Mira explained. It broadcasts human neural patterns directly into the quantum field. Every HFY within 1,000 kilometers is now experiencing human emotions, human thoughts, human memories. The effect was immediate and devastating. The HFY began to turn on each other, their collective intelligence fragmenting under the chaos of individual human consciousness. Some froze in place, overwhelmed by the experience of fear. Others began to flee, driven by panic they had never felt before. A few simply collapsed, their alien minds unable to process the full spectrum of human emotion. But the commander was stronger than the others. It fought through the quantum interference, its form stabilizing through sheer force of will. When it spoke, its voice was tinged with something that might have been respect, clever, but ultimately futile. We will adapt to this as we have adapted to everything else. The third reactor exploded, closer this time. The shockwave knocked everyone to the ground, and the radiation levels spiked beyond the tolerance of their environmental suits. Velthar could feel his skin beginning to burn, and his vision was starting to blur from radiation poisoning. Mira struggled to her feet, the quantum amplifier still humming on her back. You want to know the difference between humans and every other species you've encountered? She asked the commander. We don't just adapt to survive. We adapt to win. She pulled the pin on her last temporal sphere and held it against her chest. And sometimes, winning means making sure the other guy loses more than you do. The sphere detonated, but this time the temporal field was different. Instead of accelerating time, it began to reverse it. Mira's body began to move backward through her personal timeline, and with it, all the modifications she had made to her weapons and equipment. The quantum amplifier's signal intensified as it reverted to its original, unshielded configuration. The resulting feedback loop created a cascade effect that spread through the entire HFY collective consciousness. Creatures across the continent began to writhe in agony. As their shared neural network overloaded, the commander's perfect composure finally cracked. What have you done? Mira's voice was fading as the temporal effect consumed her. I've given you exactly what you wanted. Full integration with human consciousness, every memory, every emotion, every nightmare we've ever had. Enjoy. The quantum field collapsed, and the screaming began. The screaming wasn't audible in any conventional sense. It was a psychic shriek that seemed to emerge from the quantum field itself. Every HFY on the planet was experiencing it simultaneously, the full, unfiltered chaos of human consciousness flooding their collective network. Memories of war, love, betrayal, sacrifice, and rage poured through their shared minds like acid through crystal. Velthar watched in horrified fascination as the commander's perfect form began to distort. The creature's exoskeleton was cracking along stress lines, and bioluminescent patterns were cascading across its surface in chaotic waves. It was fighting to maintain control, but the human memories were too much, too alien, too fundamentally incompatible with its ordered existence. The female has poisoned us, the commander said, its voice fragmenting into multiple tones. We cannot integrate the chaos, but even as the HFY collective writhed in agony, they were adapting. The creatures furthest from the epicenter began to sever their connections to the network, cutting themselves off from the source of contamination. Others were developing mental barriers, quarantining the human memories behind walls of aggressive indifference. Mira's temporal field was collapsing, but she was still alive, still fighting. The quantum amplifier on her back was burning itself out, its jury-rigged components unable to sustain the massive power output. But she had bought them time-precious seconds, in which the HFY were vulnerable. Now or never, she gasped, tossing Velthar a device he didn't recognize. Resonance bomb, planted on the commander. When it goes off, it'll broadcast his death across the entire network. Velthar caught the device and immediately understood the HFY shared everything. Through their quantum connection, knowledge, experience, and apparently death itself. If he could kill the commander while it was still connected to the network, every HFY on the planet would experience the dying moment simultaneously. The problem was getting close enough to plant the bomb. The commander was wounded but still dangerous, and its elite guard was beginning to recover from the quantum interference. Velthar had 3 shots left in the dimensional crossbow, and his plasma rifle was completely drained. Cover me, he told Mira, and sprinted toward the commander. The elite HFY moved to intercept him, but Velthar was ready. His first crossbow bolt caught the nearest creature in the thorax, and the dimensional weapon tore it apart from the inside. His second shot disabled another, the projectile existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously and effectively bisecting the target across several planes of reality. That left him with 1 shot and 6 enemies. The commander had partially recovered, its mental barrier strengthening against the human memories. It raised one of its weapon appendages and fired a beam of coherent energy that barely missed Velthar's head. The air sizzled where the beam passed, and the ground behind him began to smolder. Velthar dug behind a pile of rubble and tried to plan his next move. The resonance bomb in his hand was small, barely larger than his fist, but he could feel the energy contained within it. The device was warm to the touch and seemed to vibrate with its own internal rhythm. You cannot win, the commander called out, its voice becoming more stable. We have learned from your memories. We know your tactics, your weaknesses, your fears. The female's sacrifice was meaningless. Velthar's response was to stand up and fire his last crossbow bolt, directly at the commander's center mass, but this time, the creature was ready. Its form shifted, partially phasing out of reality, and a dimensional projectile passed harmlessly through its body, predictable. The commander said, raising its weapon arm again, but Velthar was already moving. He had thrown the crossbow aside and was charging directly at the commander, the resonance bomb held high above his head. It was a desperate gambit. He would never survive long enough to plant the device manually, but he didn't need to. The bomb had a proximity trigger. Velthar activated the device as he ran, and its internal chronometer began counting down from 5 seconds. The commander realized what was happening and tried to retreat, but it was too late. Velthar was already within the blast radius. The resonance bomb detonated with a sound like reality breaking. The explosion wasn't physical, it was quantum, existing simultaneously across multiple dimensions and timelines. The commander's form was caught in the resonance wave, and its death began broadcasting across the BlackHFY network, but the creature fought back with everything it had, even as the quantum resonance tore through its consciousness. It tried to sever its connection to the collective. For a moment, Velthar thought it might succeed. The commander's mental barriers were stronger than he had anticipated. Then Mira's voice cut through the chaos. "This is for the 847,000 people you murdered," she said, and activated her final weapon. It wasn't a device this time, it was herself. The temporal field around her body collapsed inward, creating a localized singularity that lasted for exactly 1 nanosecond. In that infinitesimal moment, she experienced every possible timeline simultaneously, every potential future and past converging into a single point of absolute certainty. And in that moment of perfect clarity, she reached out through the quantum field and grabbed the commander's consciousness with her bare mind. The feedback was instantaneous and devastating. The commander's death screamed across the BlackHFY network with the force of a psychic supernova, carrying with it not just the moment of dying, but the entire experience of human consciousness. Every BlackHFY connected to the network felt it, the weight of individual mortality, the terror of being alone in their own mind, the crushing responsibility of personal choice. The collective shattered like glass. Across the planet, BlackHFY began to collapse. Some simply shut down, their minds unable to process the concept of individual existence. Others went mad, their carefully ordered thoughts dissolving into chaos. A few tried to flee, but without the collective to guide them, they were lost, confused, reduced to the level of frightened animals. Velthar felt the resonance bomb's energy wash over him, and for a moment he experienced what the BlackHFY were feeling, the terrifying isolation of being trapped inside his own skull, cut off from the comforting presence of shared consciousness. But for him, it was normal. For them, it was hell. When the quantum storm finally subsided, silence fell over the ruins of New Gethsemane. The commander's body lay at Velthar's feet, its exoskeleton cracked and lifeless. Around the plaza, the elite guard had collapsed into twitching piles of flesh and chitin. In the distance, he could see other BlackHFY wandering aimlessly through the rubble, their movements erratic and purposeless. Mira was gone. The temporal singularity had consumed her completely, leaving not even ashes behind. But her final act had broken the enemy's greatest weapon, their unity. "Commander," a voice crackled through his comm unit. It was Nexcar, his pilot. "I'm reading massive electromagnetic disturbances across the continent. The BlackHFY ships in orbit have gone dark. Whatever you did down there, it worked." Velthar looked around at the devastated cityscape, at the scattered bodies of his team, at the slowly dying BlackHFY who could no longer function without their collective consciousness. "Give me a full sensor sweep," he ordered. "I want to know how many survived." The answer, when it came, was both better and worse than he had expected. The BlackHFY collective was broken, their invasion force reduced to scattered individuals. But there were still thousands of them on the planet, and while they were no longer coordinated, they were still dangerous. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The Crimson Talon hung in orbit above Deathworld 12 like a metal vulture, its sensors constantly sweeping the planet's surface for signs of BlackHFY activity. 3 days had passed since the resonance bomb had shattered the collective consciousness, and the effects were still rippling across the continent. Velthar stood on the bridge, studying the tactical displays with grim satisfaction. The scattered BlackHFY were dying not from weapons fire, but from their inability to function as individuals, creatures that had existed as part of a collective mind. For millennia were suddenly thrust into isolation, and their alien psyches simply couldn't cope with the transition. Final casualty report, sir, Communications Officer Dexony announced. VexHFY population on the planet has dropped from 400,000 to approximately 12,000. Most of the survivors appear to be in various stages of psychological breakdown, and the ones that are still functional, scattered across 6 continents. No coordination, no apparent communication between groups. They're behaving like wild animals hunting for food, seeking shelter, avoiding contact with each other. Velthar nodded. It was better than he had hoped. The VexHFY threat wasn't completely eliminated, but it was neutered. Without their collective intelligence, they were just another dangerous predator species, deadly in small numbers, but manageable. Sir, Science Officer Yithlin called from his station. I'm detecting a transmission from the surface. It's unusual. Put it through. The voice that emerged from the speakers was clearly VexHFY in origin, but it spoke in perfect galactic standard. Please help us. We are alone, so alone. The silence is unbearable. Velthar felt a chill run down his spine. The creature was learning to be individual, to think for itself, and it was terrified. Should we respond? Dexony asked. No. Velthar said firmly. We document and observe. The conquered scientists will want to study this. Over the following days, more transmissions came from the surface. The surviving VexHFY were attempting to communicate, not with each other, but with anyone who would listen. They were learning loneliness, fear, desperation, all the emotions that came with individual consciousness. Some begged for help, others demanded to know what had been done to them. A few simply screamed. The most disturbing transmissions came from VexHFY, who had begun to exhibit human behavioral patterns, memories absorbed from the collective during the final psychic feedback. They spoke of missing families they had never had, mourned for friends who existed only in stolen human memories, and expressed guilt over crimes they had committed as part of the collective. They're becoming human, Yithlin observed during one of the daily briefings, not physically, but psychologically. The resonance bomb didn't just isolate them, it implanted human thought patterns into their minds. Mira's final revenge, Velthar said quietly. She didn't just break their collective, she forced them to become what they had tried to destroy. 2 weeks after the battle, a conquered fleet arrived to secure the system. Admiral Korthovan, the fleet commander, was a veteran of the hegemony wars and had seen his share of impossible victories. But even he seemed shaken by Velthar's report. One human survivor, the Admiral said, reviewing the data, against 400,000 VexHFY, as she not only survived, but found a way to defeat them using their own biology against them. Corporal Mira Kavanaugh was exceptional, Velthar replied. She spent 3 months studying the enemy, learning their weaknesses, preparing for exactly this scenario. The weapon modifications she created, our scientists are calling them revolutionary. The quantum disruptor alone could change the balance of power in the galaxy. And the resonance technology. The Admiral shook his head. She turned the VexHFY's greatest strength into their ultimate weakness. Velthar thought about Mira's final moments, the way she had smiled as the temporal singularity consumed her, the absolute certainty in her voice when she delivered her last message to the commander. She had known exactly what she was doing, had planned every step of her sacrifice. There's something else, sir, Velthar said. During the final battle, Corporal Kavanaugh mentioned that the VexHFY weren't just randomly invading. She believed they were sent by someone or something. Admiral Korthovan's expression grew grave. We've been analyzing the VexHFY ship remnants. There are components in their technology that don't match any known VexHFY designs. Someone was supplying them with advanced equipment. Who? We don't know yet, but the implications are disturbing. If there's another species out there that can control or direct the VexHFY, then this invasion was just a test. A probe to see how the galaxy would respond. The thought sent chills through the bridge crew. The VexHFY had been the nightmare. Species of the galaxy, bioengineered killers that had ravaged 12 star systems. Before disappearing into the void, if they were just tools in someone else's plan, what about the survivors on the planet? Velthar asked. Quarantine protocols are in effect. Deathworld 12 is now classified as a restricted system. The surviving VexHFY will be studied, but they won't be allowed to leave the planet. Too dangerous, and if they develop space flight capabilities, Admiral Korthovan's smile was cold. Then we glass the planet from orbit. The Conquered has authorized extreme measures to prevent another VexHFY expansion. As the weeks passed, The fate of the isolated HFY became clear. Some adapted to individual consciousness and began to form small, primitive societies. Others retreated into madness, unable to cope with the silence in their minds. A few exhibited remarkable creativity, building art installations that seemed to express their loneliness and confusion in ways that transcended species barriers. But they all shared one common trait: they had become mortal. The collective consciousness had given them a form of immortality, allowing damaged individuals to be absorbed back into the group mind and reconstituted. Now they were truly alone, facing the prospect of individual death for the first time in their species' history. 6 months after the battle, HFY received a final transmission from the surface. It came from a HFY who had learned to speak galactic standard with perfect pronunciation. Though his voice still carried the harmonic undertones of his species, "We understand now," the creature said. "What the human female did to us. She gave us the gift that your species has always carried, the knowledge of individual mortality. We hate her for it, and we thank her for it. We are free, terrifyingly, beautifully free." The transmission ended, and HFY never heard from the surface again. The surviving HFY had found their own path, whatever that might be. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson from Deathworld 12. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their adaptability or their technology, or even their capacity for violence. It was their ability to remain individuals while still functioning as a group, to make personal sacrifices for collective goals, to carry the weight of individual consciousness without being crushed by it. And sometimes, when pushed to the very edge of extinction, they could use that strength to break their enemies in ways that no one, not even the humans themselves, fully understood. The Crimson Talon jumped to hyperspace, leaving Deathworld 12 behind. But the legend of BlackHFY, the human who stood alone against 400,000 enemies, and one would spread throughout the galaxy. And every species that heard the story would understand a fundamental truth about humanity. They were the species that could turn their greatest weakness into their enemy's greatest fear. In the depths of space, something ancient and malevolent took note of what had happened on Deathworld 12. The HFY had failed, but they had provided valuable data about human capabilities. The next test would be different, more subtle, more deadly, but that was a problem for another day. For now, the galaxy was safe, and one human woman's sacrifice had saved billions of lives. The dead of New Gethsemane could rest in peace. Their vengeance was complete.